For the past few years, we've seen a disturbing trend known as cancel culture, where the free and open expression of differing points of view is not only discouraged, but can result in intimidation, public humiliation, and even loss of one's livelihood. Thank you. Our next two panelists, Ilya Shapiro and Amber Athey, have both been attacked viciously by the woke mob that acts as the cancel culture police. And yet, both of them have not only survived, they've thrived. Ilya and Amber will be joined by our moderator, Carrie Sheffield, who is a columnist and broadcaster in Washington, D.C., as well as a Tony Blankley Senior Fellow with the Steamboat Institute. Let's welcome our panel to the stage.
Stick your progress where the sun don't shine. Keep your big mess away from me and mine. If you leave us alone, well, we'd all be just fine. Stick your progress where the sun don't.
All right, thank you everyone. So good to be here, and you all heard from Ilya earlier. We're gonna get more deep and dirty into what happened to Ilya. You heard his great lecture earlier today. And Amber obviously is a familiar face here to the Steamboat crowd. And good idea to move that.
Thank you, Ilya. Here, Dean.
That's all right.
Okay. So masculine.
Toxic, dare I say that? That's non-toxic masculinity right there, folks. So I wanted to just start this panel out to talk, to hear directly from our panelists about what happened. Both of them suffered really financial losses, career losses because of this concept of cancel culture. So I thought it would be better just to hear directly from them what happened. And then we're going to talk about kind of the diagnosis of how do we solve this issue? What do we do from here? What are the solutions to counter cancel culture? So Amber, why don't we start with you? Just walk us through, and I want to start by putting up, we have a couple visuals to just explain exactly what happened. These words that Amber put up on screen. She said, "Kamala looks like a UPS employee. What can Brown do for you? Nothing good, apparently."
Where's the lie? Where's the lie?
And this is what she was referring to. This is Kamala, our vice president, during the State of the Union. And this is her wardrobe. This was a fashion plate commentary by Amber, but it spun downward to a much darker place. Amber, what happened?
Sure. So about a year ago, I actually started guest hosting on a program on WMAL, which is a DC conservative talk radio station on the Larry O'Connor show, and eventually they decided that they were going to bring on a cast of 3 rotating hosts that would work alongside Larry, and I ended up being one of the chosen co-hosts for the show. I was on 2 days a week and was really loving life, really enjoyed doing the radio. It was a part-time gig for me, but felt like a really great advancement in my career. And it was on the State of the Union when I had sent this tweet out. Thought it was kind of a harmless remark and certainly didn't go viral or anything, so nobody seemed to have a problem with it. But what actually happened was, it was a few days later that I started arguing with a left-wing freelance journalist about the idea of gender transitions for children. And this journalist was arguing for the idea that kids can pick a different gender than the one that they were born as and undergo medical transitions. I obviously have a huge problem with this. That was actually where things started to spiral out of control, was this left-wing journalist and his trans lobby activists that followed him on Twitter decided that because I was opposed to the idea of child gender transitions that I needed to be canceled. So they dug back into the archives, basically looking for anything that they could to try to destroy me, settled upon this Kamala tweet, which was reframed from being about her outfit at the State of the Union to being about her skin color. They screenshotted it without context and put it out and started calling me a racist. I've been called a racist so many times in my career, honestly, it doesn't even faze me anymore, and I'm sure you all are familiar with this. It's a term that really doesn't mean anything anymore because the left uses it to describe anybody that they disagree with. So I was unbothered, but then they started emailing my employers. The first is, I work for The Spectator as a writer, and The Spectator got maybe 2 emails from these people and just laughed it off. They thought it was kind of funny, and obviously ridiculous. But WMAL, which is owned by a parent company known as Cumulus Media, got a similar amount of reaction and decided that this was actually a racist tweet and that I was going to be fired. So it was a week after the Kamala tweet. I got a phone call from 2 executives at Cumulus Media who told me that they do not condone racism at their company, that my tweet was racist, and that I was going to be terminated effective immediately with no opportunity to defend myself, to explain the tweet, or basically any other common professional courtesy. And I stayed silent for about a month because I was trying to see if there was anything that I could do legally to challenge these people. I wanted to give them the opportunity to do the right thing and bring me back. My co-hosts at WMAL were very gracious and tried to lobby on my behalf. But after 30 days of inaction, I decided that I needed to go public with what happened to me so that other people could hear about the crazy ways that cancel culture is affecting our society, and also to warn other people, just because you're at a conservative organization doesn't mean that you are necessarily protected or that people are going to stand up for you. So that was my experience, but I'm sure we'll talk about what we are up to now, me and Ilya, because I think we're both doing just fine.
No, I think you've landed in a better place. And for those of you who might be too young to know, what you were referring to in your tweet was it from the 80s, like a UPS campaign?
It's a UPS slogan. They discontinued it, I believe, in 2010. So I guess if you are, one of these young woke progressive activists who believes in gender transitions for kids, maybe you were not familiar with the UPS slogan, but it only takes about 30 seconds of typing your fingers into the Google machine to figure it out. But
yeah, because the phrase was, "What can Brown do for you?" And
yeah.
you directly quoted that, so it was obviously very clear what you were referring to. But the 3 words you used, freelance, leftist, freelance journalist, that's toxic cocktail right there. But
exactly.
Well, let's move to Ilya, and then we'll bring you back. So walk us. I feel like we're in group therapy here. About what happened. This is Ilya's tweet, and I'm glad we have the tweets here so you can see for yourselves exactly the words here that were supposedly so offensive.
Yeah, my wife said, "This is a great year for you. You get to talk about yourself all the time." So I'd been at the Cato Institute for nearly 15 years, and got an opportunity to do something different, to have a different kind of impact, to move to Georgetown University's law school, head up their Center for the Constitution. 4 days before I was due to begin there, which was supposed to be February 1st, was when Justice Breyer, well, it wasn't that he announced his retirement, the news of his retirement was leaked by the White House, forcing his hand effectively. And of course, immediately President Biden reiterated that he would fulfill his campaign pledge of appointing a black woman. And I thought to myself, you heard my talk earlier, this is what I do for a living, commenting on these sorts of things, analyzing the Supreme Court. And I was doing media that day. I was in Austin, Texas. I was traveling. And I came back to my hotel room later that evening. I was in a kind of festive and feisty mood, and thought, this is, if I were Joe Biden, if I were a Democratic president, who would I want on the Supreme Court? And I thought, Sri Srinivasan, who was a finalist under Obama for the seat, for the nomination that went to Garland, chief judge of the D.C. Circuit, universally respected, definitely very progressive, no doubt about that, happens also to be Indian American and an immigrant. He was born in India. And I thought, and had my doom scrolling through Twitter right before going to bed, not a best practice.
Never.
And
Can confirm.
more and more upset about the president's decision to limit his decision-making, his employment practice by race and sex, and I tweeted that out. And then I went to bed. And I woke up and I checked my phone, and all heck had broken loose, and especially a Twitter troll who is Slate's legal correspondent, Mark Joseph Stern, had screen capped that. I took it down first thing in the morning and said, I didn't word that well. Sorry about that. Here's a better way of saying it. And eventually, 76% of the American people agreed that you shouldn't be limiting your search for Supreme Court justices by race and sex. But the damage had been manufactured. I wouldn't say done. It was manufactured. The outrage mob was generated. And to be clear, I didn't care about the online Twitter mob. That was not my concern. I've been attacked before. My skin's pretty thick. But I was in this vulnerable position that I was about to switch jobs and join Georgetown. And that day, January 27th, was one of the worst days of my life. I just tweeted about those first 4 days of hell on my Substack, Shapiro's Gavel, one of the endeavors I've gotten up to since all of this concluded. So you can check out the kind of more detailed play-by-play there. And there'll be more about that. And it was 4 days of fighting for my job. Again, didn't care who's insulting me on Twitter or whatever.
Ankle biters, that's what I like to call them on Twitter.
Right. But the Georgetown's dean immediately put out a statement mischaracterizing my tweet as saying that no black woman could ever be qualified for the Supreme Court, and this stands against everything we do at Georgetown here. And eventually, long story short, I was put on, I was onboarded that February 1st, but immediately placed on paid administrative leave pending investigation into whether I had violated the university's harassment and anti-discrimination policies. And away we went. And those 4 days of hell would ultimately be followed by 4 months of purgatory. Quickly became apparent this was a sham investigation. What is there to investigate? There was that tweet that you just saw, and there's a very short university policy on free expression, on harassment, on anti-discrimination. It's a law school, for God's sakes. You have some contract professor look at these things and give you a verdict, you know. But it lasted for 4 months, and ultimately I was reinstated, sort of. They made the determination that, by they I mean the diversicrats in the HR office, that it turns out I had not been an employee when I tweeted, and so none of these policies applied to me in the first place. So I celebrated that technical victory, but it didn't sit well with me. And then later that day, a few hours after the dean told me and announced publicly what was going on, I received the actual report from the Office of, Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, and Affirmative Action. And this report, 12 single-spaced pages, I think it was, maybe more, I forget how much it was at this point. The upshot of which was clearly that had I been an employee, it would have been disciplinable. And anytime, if I were to say something similar in future, that would create a hostile educational environment subjecting me to discipline. I could not work that way. In discussing with my lawyer, provided by FIRE, the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, my favorite organization. Once you've maxed out to Steamboat and Manhattan Institute, you should go look at FIRE as well. But my lawyer for that they provided, and Randy Barnett, professor at Georgetown, my boss at the center, my wife, who's a better lawyer than all of us, came to the conclusion that I had to resign. That I couldn't do my job as a public commentator and teacher and scholar with this sort of Damocles that would lead to a star chamber, to mix metaphors. And so I wrote up probably the best lawyering I've done in my life, this 4-page resignation letter, which is public. You can look it up. And as one does, half an hour after submitting that resignation letter to the dean on Monday morning, my op-ed announcing it, summarizing it, went live in the Wall Street Journal. And of course, the next day, as one does, I announced my next job at Manhattan on Tucker Carlson's show. So that was 2 months ago, 2.5 months ago at this point, and I've sort of, didn't choose to become a poster boy for cancel culture. I was always for free speech and academic freedom and the First Amendment and all this. But now with my so-called lived experience, I'm catching my breath from that insanity and trying to use this platform and this moment that I've been given to shine a light on the rot in academia and expose the illiberal, and by that I do mean illiberal, not liberal, takeover of so many of our institutions.
Thank you. Well, Ilya, I know one thing that you pointed out before, and you mentioned in your Wall Street Journal op-ed, was just this double standard, that there were professors who had already been onboarded and been with Georgetown for quite some time who had made tweets that were incredibly aggressive and, of course, always going and attacking Republicans, and yet they faced no sort of discipline. What was the response? Did you get any response from the administration when you pointed out this double standard? Yeah,
I gave 4 examples. Not that any of these professors whose tweets were much more inflammatory than mine was, regardless of whether you agree or disagree. I wasn't saying that they should have been punished or investigated, but I shouldn't have either. It was a case of free speech for thee, but not for me. There was no response. To this day, I have not gotten a response from anyone at Georgetown either to my resignation letter, other than the one line, "I accept your resignation, Ilya," from the dean. Nothing at all. Probably because their lawyers told them to shut up and not communicate with me, which is good legal advice. But no, I have not heard from anyone in any official capacity.
So Amber, I know we had talked a little bit before about, you've got a platform, you can reach potentially millions of readers through your writing, and you've got a big social media presence. So you have ways to fight back when this is happening. So first, can you talk a little bit about what happened to you career-wise when this cancellation happened? And then what did it do for you personally? How did you personally kind of process it? And then also, what advice would you have for just maybe someone who isn't a public figure and they're facing this? Maybe they said something in a boardroom or, facing a customer. What sort of recourse would you give for someone who doesn't have your level of platform?
Yeah, definitely. So the first part, I guess my initial reaction to what happened to me was I was really angry and I wanted to do something about it. And I have, friends who have been through similar things, and they just kind of faded off into the night, and that just didn't seem right to me. I was warned by several people about burning bridges, and I spoke to a mentor of mine who basically said, there's no bridges left, right? With the way that the left treats conservatives and the way that you're constantly being policed, you can't really afford to have that kind of mindset anymore. And my parents raised me to be a fighter. My dad was a huge influence on me. When I was a kid and I was in school, he would always say, if somebody ever bullies you, you just pop them in the face one time and they'll never mess with you again. He said, don't worry, we won't ground you or anything, but you will have to face whatever the school does. But I don't know, I thought that was fairly decent advice. I knew that if I was going to speak about it, that it needed to be aggressive, and I needed to not apologize or back down or offer any sort of conciliatory tone to the people who had done this to me. I also went on Tucker Carlson. He's been a great advocate for people like us who have been punished for merely exercising our right to speech. I wrote an op-ed for The Spectator, basically did as many media hits as I possibly could in a span of about 2 weeks. I think the first week I did 40 TV and radio appearances and lost my voice, so that was fun. And then just started thinking about what's next. Like, how can I sort of leverage this into an opportunity instead of rolling over and dying? And announced my new podcast, Unfit to Print, which I've been doing for a few months now. I have a new radio gig, which I can't announce just yet, but it will be coming soon. And also just finished my first book, which is coming out this fall, about the woke takeover of media, which was very fitting. So I had a lot of new material to add into that, thanks to what happened at Cumulus. And really,
Who's your publisher?
Bombardier Books, through Post Hill Press. And really, I guess my message to Cumulus and to the people who had tried to cancel me and I guess somewhat succeeded was I wanted them to think twice before they did this to somebody else, because Cumulus Media maybe got 2 or 3 emails from people who were actually upset about the Kamala tweet. And the amount of backlash that they received when I went public with what happened was 100 times that. And so their reputation was significantly more harmed by deciding to fire me than if they had decided to stand up for me. So if anybody else at one of the Cumulus-owned radio stations is faced with a similar pickle, Cumulus executives are going to look back at what I did and say, maybe we shouldn't fire this person because last time we caught a hell of a lot of flack for that. So hopefully that can help protect somebody in the future. Now this is a harder thing if you don't have a platform, and there's a lot more to weigh when you are a private citizen who doesn't have the ability to fight back like Ilya and I do. And I would never begrudge someone for saying, I have to support my family and I can't really take this on right now, or I need to do something to protect my job. I think that's completely understandable. If you are faced with a situation, number one, find the best damn lawyer you absolutely can, and see if there's any legal recourse that you can take. And number two, build communities. I think so often conservatives just kind of hide in the shadows and are terrified of saying anything at their job because they think that they're the only person. And then when somebody starts talking or somebody takes a leadership position and shows that they believe in this right to free speech, in pro-America values, in patriotism, people around them start to speak too. And you start to become an inspiration for the people around you. And if you have a strong backing, if you have a strong group of people who are willing to stand up for each other, it makes it a lot more difficult for companies in particular to punish you, because you have to take if you punish me, you have to punish all of us approach. And that becomes, it's just exponentially more painful for any corporation.
No, that's great. No, and I think what you're saying about banding together, I mean, we're seeing that even at a corporate level in terms of technology companies who are rising up to compete with some of these big tech leftist platforms. So I know you were on Twitter and you were constrained by Twitter, Ilya, with your phrasing. And if you'd gone on Getter, they have twice the number of characters, so perhaps you wouldn't have had that problem. But Getter, if you're not familiar with Getter, they call it the Twitter Slayer. It was founded by Jason Miller, who was one of President Trump's former comms directors. I believe they have now between 3 and 5 million users.
Too many
that they're
apps.
growing.
There's Truth Social, Parler, all these different things. I'm trying to cut down on my social media, not expand the thing.
Yeah. Well, maybe cut Twitter out of your life. And in fact, that's one of our audience members here says, is it better just to stay off Twitter for young conservative activists?
It depends what you're doing. I mean, this is the thing. What I was going to answer in response to your question. What do you do if you're trying, if you're caught in something like this? Number one is identify what your goal is. Is your goal to keep your job? Is your goal to gain publicity? Is your goal to make a lot of money? What is your goal? Is your goal to get a better job, right? And so I was in a slightly different situation than Amber. I wasn't fired outright. I wasn't, called up by Georgetown and said, you're gone, your contract rescinded. I would have acted differently than I had all these months had that happened. All throughout that time, I did not attack Georgetown. I spoke out. I had a concerted PR strategy where initially I said nothing for about the first month or so. Then it became clear that everything was a sham. I started commenting on my area of expertise, the Supreme Court. There was a new nominee, the hearing, all of that sort of thing. And then eventually I started commenting on free speech and cancel culture and stuff without specifically referring to Georgetown. So that was all calculated. But had I been fired right away, then I would have been on the media tour immediately. I mean, I turned down a bunch of stuff in the first month or so. But the goal was for me to keep my job, and so I had to do certain things that I wouldn't have had I been immediately fired. But all of this goes to only you can kind of accept your own cancellation, right? Cancellation is different from being fired. It's different from facing pressure or heat or something. It's like deciding to lose your voice, deciding to bend the knee, deciding to just completely change who you are and what you are. And so for people who don't have these platforms and what have you, find someone who does. In addition to finding a good lawyer, find that publicity in some way. Not publicity, you might not need publicity, but you need PR help. Because initially you might not want things to be public, but you might want whoever is pressuring you to know that things could be made public. And that's how you find community as well. If any of this happens to you, feel free to get in touch with me. If I can't, I'm a simple constitutional lawyer. I might not be able to help you directly, but through this lived experience, I can put you in touch with people, or I can give you certain strategies, because that crisis management is just so important. And so that's, think strategically, get off social media, because there you're only going to, that's a phony war. You have to think about what are the real world consequences that I'm facing, and what is my goal? How do I recover from the situation? Or what do I want to gain out of it? And how do I engage in jujitsu? Put whoever's attacking me on the wrong foot. And you don't mean your boss, you mean whoever's pressuring your boss, or whatever pressure your boss is feeling, or things like that.
Folks, we're getting some great questions, so please feel free to text away. Amber, I'm going to give you this one. They say, is there any segment of the population that's insulated from the repercussions of cancel culture? And when does the extent of such cancellation become satisfied?
Great question. I don't know the answer to the second part, but the first part, there's certain celebrities that are insulated from cancellation. Like Kanye West is never going to be canceled, right? He's almost too powerful in a sense. Elon Musk is never going to be canceled. Probably like Barstool Sports will never be canceled. But there's also different levels of cancellation, as Ilya was referring to. There's actually being fired from your job. There's facing social repercussions or social ruin. There's being put on probation or financial consequences. For example, the truckers in Canada who were part of the Freedom Convoy who were kicked off of the GoFundMe platform for people who were trying to fundraise for their legal expenses. So there's different types of cancellation, and I think to some extent everybody is vulnerable to at least one of those. So even the people who are still getting work in Hollywood, even though they're conservative or they don't talk about politics, for example, maybe don't get invited to all of the best Beverly Hills parties or whatever. I mean, yeah, I guess that pretty much answers. What was the second part again? Maybe I can't answer that.
When does the extent of such cancellation become satisfied? Is there ever
There's no, it's never satisfied. And this was one of the points that I made pretty heavily on my appearance with Tucker was the number one worst thing that you can do if you are facing cancellation, depending on your goals, is apologize or bend the knee. Because as soon as you do that, you have shown weakness. And the progressive mob absolutely thrives on weakness. They want to see you grovel, they want to see you upset, they want to see you shamed into silence. The whole purpose of cancellation is to shut people up and to prevent you and subsequently other people like you from being willing to speak out. So as soon as you apologize or say, oh, I'm sorry I said it like this, or I'm sorry I did this, or whatever, then you have told them that what they're doing is working, right? So I would always caution anyone against trying to placate people who are not happy with placation. They want total domination, and so there's never a point where they're satisfied.
So I actually concur in part and dissent in part from this, because I did have a limited strategic apology for the internal consumption of the dean, basically, some senior faculty perhaps, because in my terms, not in their terms. I didn't, bend the knee in terms of adopting, systemic racism and structures, and I wasn't aware I'm going to educate and do the work and all that, But I said, I'm a communications professional. I phrased this poorly. That's on me. I should have phrased it better, and I recognize that some people took offense, and I apologize for that. That clearly was not good enough for, all the, wokest people, but I wasn't apologizing to them. I was apologizing to the spineless administrators, right? So, and this was not something I conceived myself. This was all, strategized and whatever on an emergency basis. I mean, those first 24, 48, 72 hours are pretty crazy. But then in a later Zoom, when the associate dean asked me, well, would you want to issue a further apology, maybe talk about some of the systemic issues that you didn't address? I'm like, no. That serves no purpose. If the university wants to work with me on a joint statement that talking about how there will be no repercussions because we believe in free speech, I'm happy to work with you in a way that shows that I am cognizant that some people felt hurt and everybody should be welcome and everybody would be welcome in my class, as they would be, of course, and would be treated equally, etc. But I said I'm not going to do any more. My Twitter apology of just I phrased that poorly, I apologize, I'm taking it down. And then my second kind of 2-paragraph thing for the faculty listserv that I publicized as well, just to make everything transparent, was for that limited purpose. So, but again, I was in a unique sort of situation. Otherwise, once you're fired and there's nothing to be gotten for it, of course, there's no reason to be apologizing.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up because there's totally a difference between apologizing for how you say something or for it being misinterpreted and then apologizing for believing a certain thing, right? And your apology was never saying, oh, I don't actually think she's the most qualified, or I don't actually think that Biden shouldn't pick someone just because she's a black woman. So I think that is an important distinction.
Yeah, no. Well, and Amber, to your point on the, I want to do another plug for another company. You mentioned the truckers in Canada. They were thrown off of GoFundMe. A good alternative is Give, Send, Go. If you haven't heard of Give, Send, Go, it was created by people who believe in free speech and support conservative. And the thing is, they don't even want conservative. They just want a fair marketplace of raising money for people. They stepped in when that New York bodega owner was brutally assaulted and defended himself, and GoFundMe threw him off, and Give, Send, Go stepped in and helped. So flagging that for you guys. But Amber, I want to ask you.
Oh wait, I didn't answer the actual question about Twitter, whether young conservatives should be on Twitter. Just real quick. Unfortunately, it's a collective action problem. So we would be all better off if Elon Musk bought Twitter and launched it into the sun. But so long as it exists, if you're in the ideas business, if you're in the communications business, you kind of have to be on there because that's where so much of the action is. And so, for any one person or small group of people to get off, it's a unilateral disarmament, as it were, and you can't be as effective. So yes, that's the answer about Twitter.
Yeah,
I agree.
So Amber, what's your take on, earlier this year, I'm not going to say who it was, but I was talking to a conservative who, I was saying, like, if we go and try to cancel other people, like if we try to boycott, like let's try to boycott a leftist company or things like that, then we're doing our own version of cancel culture. And he said, yeah, I'm fine with that. I think it's good to cancel terrible ideas, like allowing minors to, undergo severe medical transitions without parental consent. He's okay with canceling that. And then other people have said, well, the right, when they were more in the cultural majority, they were fine canceling, with the McCarthy hearings and, driving out communists. They weren't afraid to cancel communists and blacklist them and things like that. Do you think there's truth to that? What's your take on that? And has it just become a new form of who is being canceled and who is doing the cancellation?
Well, I think the fundamental difference between the so-called cancellation efforts by conservatives versus the woke mob is that conservatives were not really trying to cancel people, they were trying to cancel ideas. And that was through the marketplace of debate, right? What progressives do is they attack individuals. And the reason that they attack individuals is because they're hoping that if they are able to get rid of one person, that sends a chilling effect through other people who hold similar ideas. Now, that being said, after what I've gone through and what I've seen so many of my friends go through, one of my calls to action, as it were, after I got fired was, hell yeah, we should email Cumulus and tell them we're not listening to their radio stations anymore. Because if these companies are going to operate based on the left's woke mob tactics, I don't see any reason why the right should refuse to use what works, right? Like, I think we're depriving ourselves of really important power if we try to say, oh, we're the principled ones, we don't do stuff like that, because you're just allowing yourself to get steamrolled. Society clearly doesn't value our tactics right now. So I think it's personally fine to adopt some of them. I mean, within reason, right? I still believe in principles, but I don't think it's unprincipled to say, as a conservative, this company doesn't align with my values, or this company hurts somebody that I care about, so I'm not going to patronize them anymore. Like, I don't think that's cancel culture. So yeah, I told people, if you want to support me or you want to support people like me, then call Cumulus and tell them that what they did was horrible and that you're not going to listen anymore, or find an alternative radio station. And I think that can be a perfectly solid and acceptable tactic. And I don't know, one thing that also really bothers me about the conservative response to cancel culture is that there is sort of this, this reflexive idea that because conservatives don't want to talk about cancel culture or they don't want to engage in it themselves, they don't stick up for each other. And I've seen so many instances where somebody gets canceled and conservative will say, well, I don't love what they said, so I'm not going to publicly defend them, or I don't want to get dragged into the mess, so I'm not going to publicly defend them. And that's just not good enough to me anymore. I mean, if we don't band together, we're all going to hang separately. That's just the reality of the situation.
Oh, very true. Ilya, here's a direct question for you from the audience. They ask, for aspiring lawyers, how much should free speech be a factor in deciding what law school to attend? Georgetown is a known great law school, but given your experience, would you still recommend it for young people? And what law schools might you even recommend for young conservative students aspiring to go to top law schools?
I'd recommend not going to law school. Not even because of any woke stuff, but just there's a lot of miserable, indebted lawyers out there.
Poof, but there's a magic wand that's going to erase all that, don't you know?
Right. You have to have a really good reason for going to law school. You have to be able to squarely answer the question, why do you want to be a lawyer and what kind of law do you want to practice? Because If it's like, I want your job, I'm like, I'm still trying to figure out what I want to be when I grow up, and I've magically been able to be paid for kind of my opinions and stuff like this, but this is not the typical path. Most people fall into law school as a default, or because they're like, oh, it's such a versatile degree. Like, well, to do what concretely, though? That's 3 years of opportunity cost in addition to the very expensive tuition and all that. Plus, you know, the idea that you should go to the best law school you get into or something like that, that's not true either. That's kind of a sliding scale.
Because merit doesn't matter anymore at these schools anyway.
Well, that's not it. It's that if you want to be in your hometown practicing, then it doesn't matter, you know, that your local law school is 37 ranking points lower than, you know, Alabama or Iowa or whatever other school that you might be considering. Because in your hometown, that local school is going to have a stronger network and more referrals and all that than the higher rated school elsewhere. So if you're not already talking, you know, past the first 10 or 12, 15 law schools that have a national reputation, beyond that, you know, go to where you actually want to practice, I guess, is one thing. In terms of evaluating where places are good, where they're bad, most are bad, so you can just assume they're bad and do your research and see if there's anything good that you see at a school you're considering. My alma mater, University of Chicago, is still pretty good. UVA is decent. Harvard actually is not bad. Harvard is so big, the only school bigger than Harvard is Georgetown actually. But Harvard is so big that there's a critical mass of anybody, and they've had a series of good deans, including Elena Kagan, who is a phenomenal Harvard dean, both on student life and intellectual diversity and other things, that has allowed Harvard to do well in terms of that sort of thing. You'll still have professors that teach crazy things, and the majority of the classmates and stuff, but there's so many classmates that you'll find your niche that way. But just, you know, look for evidence of fair-mindedness from the university administration for a commitment to free speech. When they're saying, you know, we stand for this, and it's always going to be DEI first, right, which is ironic, right, because diversity, equity, inclusion, that is against intellectual diversity, prevents equal opportunity, and excludes those who diverge from the accepted orthodoxy. But beyond DEI, what do they stand for? They stand for providing services to, you know, whatever it is. But where does free speech rank there? Where does intellectual discovery rank there? See what the university, how it markets itself. So look for evidence that there's any good there, but just assume that they're bad before you find it.
Good default. So, Amber, in your estimate, does the woke cancel crowd represent a true majority of the citizenship, our audience member asks, or is this a matter of a silent majority ceding to a very aggressive but much smaller minority?
Yeah, it's the second, absolutely. And really what happened, and I explore this in my book that's coming out, it's called The Snowflakes Revolt, is that when conservatives were talking, I know I'm criticizing conservatives a lot up here, but it's just because I want us to be better. I'm not trying to be mean. But there was a claim from conservative punditry a few years ago, really back between 2014 to 2017, I would say, when a lot of the crazy campus wokeness was going on and students were shutting down Ben Shapiro and Michael Knowles and a lot of these other speakers, was that the snowflakes are going to graduate and they're going to be melted in the real world, right? They're going to go out, they're going to get jobs, and there's no safe space at your job. Well, instead, what happened is these college students graduated, and because a lot of them went to these very prestigious schools, and a lot of companies just look at the piece of paper to see where you graduated from, got hired on at a lot of our major institutions. They got hired on at Google, at Apple, at major media companies, corporate media, Washington Post, New York Times, and they use the same mob tactics that they use to silence debate on campus in our major institutions. And the institution leaders were totally unprepared for this because they thought that these students would magically just become more centrist and more liberal, and instead they got completely steamrolled. They didn't know what to do, they didn't know how to respond to it, and so they did the same thing that the campus administrators did, which was they bent the knee and they gave them everything they wanted in the hopes that they would just not be called racist. They could call everybody else racist, but as long as they don't call us racist, then it's fine. And now you see this leftward lurch of pretty much every major institution in American society. So it absolutely is a small minority. It's really some of the most elite people, came from wealthy backgrounds, went to private schools, graduated with liberal arts degrees, and got really high-paying jobs out of college, and yet somehow have turned themselves into marginalized victims while the rest of us are the evil oppressors. So that worldview isn't going away anytime soon unless we encourage the leaders in society to start fighting back and standing up for themselves.
Yeah, I think the silver lining of what it illustrates is that a small, committed group of individuals can have an outsized impact and can really turn that tide. So Ilya, here's another question for you about law schools. And Ilya's Jewish, but this is a question about Christian law schools. They want to know, what's your opinion on private Christian law schools?
Again, you want to go to the law school that meets your needs in terms of setting you up for the kind of career that you're going to law school to achieve. So I'm going to be speaking later this fall at Regent in Virginia Beach. If you're a committed Christian and you want to be in Virginia Beach, or I don't know where their network is, frankly. I don't know if you're here in Colorado, Colorado Springs obviously has a big evangelical community. Do they see a Regent University law degree as significant because it comes from that tradition? I don't know, but it's something to investigate. But I don't have, beyond that, I can't speak to it.
Yeah. Here's another good question. Amber, do we have any idea if these Twitter storms used to destroy people are primarily composed of bots or real live zombies? Like, do you think a lot of this is just ginned up and even automated, or like troll farms and
Yeah, I mean, I don't really know the answer to that. I mean, my understanding was that ahead of the 2016 election, there was some work by bots to try to divide American culture on politics. Like, there were Facebook rallies for Black Lives Matter that were organized by Russian bots. But in my experience, most of the people were real, the few that were involved in it, and had been involved in other cancel campaigns as well. You see kind of the same names over and over and over again. Like Mark Joseph Stern, who was involved in trying to cancel Ilya, went to, I believe he was a double Hoya, so he went to Georgetown undergrad as well, I believe. But that's where I went to school. And when I was an undergrad at Georgetown, he had tried to cancel me for being a college Republican, and was involved with reaching out to the administration to complain about the fact that I was being allowed to graduate. So you kind of see similar names over and over again. It's the same people who are really involved in this stuff, and it is almost their own little warped community. So my sense is that it is mostly real people, but there's not very many of them.
Yeah, that's interesting that this individual, and I'm sorry we've mentioned his name twice, has gone after both of you. I'm kind of scared now. Ilya, when it comes to kind of the difference someone is asking here about private companies versus government and kind of that interplay, how do you think about, Twitter canceling someone? People say, well, we should have, government action against it. But it is a private company. But at the same time, people say, well,
this is a little different. This is not Twitter canceling me.
No, but I'm just saying in general, not you specifically. But when sometimes people complain about cancel culture, conservative, a big tech company censored me, or Mark Zuckerberg deliberately suppressed this Hunter Biden laptop story, but it's a privately held company. As a lawyer, how do you think about the ability for private companies to do that? And is there a legal argument to say they're colluding with the FBI? And so in some ways, they're sort of quasi-government institutions, and therefore the laws of free speech should be more applicable to them.
Well, different cases are different. So colluding with the FBI, or there's a case where I think Twitter and Facebook, maybe some other platform, was taking the lead from CDC, saying things about what COVID misinformation was and acting accordingly. When it's when you're effectively become an agent of the government, that's a little different scenario than Twitter acting proactively to ban things it doesn't like. So again, direct government involvement is a separate legal area, which is interesting. And I think there's litigation going on in that, and that's something definitely to pursue. More broadly, kind of market power of these tech giants, I haven't been satisfied by the antitrust argument. There's something to the common carrier argument, the sense that in the 19th century, there's only one railroad line, and it's like a public utility, and it's so it can be regulated in that way. It's an inexact analogy. There's something to that. I haven't been fully satisfied with any kind of legal remedies to that sort of thing. There's kind of, what's interesting to me is, even though I'm a lawyer, at least I play one on TV, the kind of non-legal jujitsu of Ron DeSantis firing a shot across the bow of all corporate America by taking action against Disney after they stood against one of his pieces of legislation. I kind of feel squeamish about government going after private companies whose policies they don't like. But you notice that after that, and this came right before the Dobbs abortion leak and everything else, you didn't have corporate America reacting the last few months as it did before then. So, sometimes maybe some sort of jujitsu that way works. But that's not a lawsuit. That's not an antitrust action or considering Twitter to be a government actor in that regard. This is still definitely a developing area of legal theorizing, although, as you said, to circle back, whether it's the FBI, whether it's the CDC, whoever, if it seems like the tech platforms are changing their algorithms or their practices based on implicit direction that they're getting from the government, that's a problem, because that's directly, there's case law on what being tied to or getting a nudge or a wink from the government, which makes you lose your protections as a private actor.
All right, Ilya, we're going to follow your analysis on that going forward. If I was a leftist freelance journalist, I would be literally shaking about how triggered I am by these two people on stage, but I'm not, so I just want everyone to give a round of applause to our two wonderful guests. And